What's a fact that sounds fake but is actually true? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Radio Shack sued a regional auto parts chain, Auto Shack, for infringing on their name. Auto Shack changed their name to AutoZone. Years later, Radio Shack created a section called Power Zone, so AutoZone sued them for infringing on their name. Answer: I worked for Radio Shack long ago. They were happy to sue any business or company using the words shack or radio in their name. One that happened while I worked there was some mom and pop place opened a restaurant called Pizza Shack, and they were taken to court. We were all told to be very careful about how we use the company name as well. This was before social media, but we were warned that even using the name of the store outside of work could be grounds for a lawsuit. They just ended up eliminate themselves, actually. Story 2. Egyptian civilization is so old that ancient Egypt itself had Egyptology. They had no more clue about the origins of the Sphinx than we do today. Answer: Egypt is so ridiculously old it can be hard to truly picture. Cleopatra ruled in 50 BCE. There was already 5,000 years of Egyptian civilization at that point. We are currently only 2074 years from Cleopatra's rule. Think how old Roman ruins are, how ancient they seem to us. And ancient Egypt 2,000 years ago had double that time as a civilization. Anyways, prehistory fascinates me, and I'll take most any excuse to enthuse about it. Story 3. There would be a lot more ancient Egyptian mummies around if the Victorians didn't turn most of them into paint or eat them. Answer: I literally just learned about Mummy Brown last month and was shocked. I'd never heard of that insanity before. As an artist and nerd who loves to do deep dives into that sort of weirdness, I was also like, come on, how nice a brown could it really be? And when I looked it up, I could kind of see why it was used until it ran out. But just use Prout's brown and be cool, guys. Story 4. The U.S. Appalachian Mountains and the Scottish Highlands are the same mountain range, torn asunder by plate tectonics. The ancient mountains are older than sharks, themselves older than the rings of Saturn, and knew a world before trees. In Misrandi 1, Trinity 1. Answer: related, and my favorite moment of geologic irony. Stone Mountain in Georgia. You know the giant monument fetishizing the Confederacy carved into the side of a granite outcropping is a granite intrusion that was pushed to the surface during the Alleghanian Orogeny, which was when the plates of North Africa and North America collided. Even a racist's best attempt at aggrandizing racism was carved into the literal result of America and Africa mixing geologically. Story 5. Up until a few months ago, John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, had a living grandson. John Tyler was born in 1790 and took office in 1841 when he assumed the presidency upon William Henry Harrison's passing. He had 8 children with his first wife and 7 with his second, the youngest being born in 1860 when he was 70, making him the U.S. president who fathered the most children. His son Lyon had a child when he was 75 years old in 1928. Tyler's grandson Harrison Ruffin Tyler was living in Virginia until his passing on May 25th, 2025. The difference from John Tyler's birth to Harrison Tyler's passing was a span of 235 years. Story 6. Pokemon has made more money than Harry Potter, Marvel, the Beatles, and Taylor Swift combined. Pokemon is the highest grossing IP of all time, and it isn't even remotely close. Pokemon is many 10 Bs ahead of second place. Story 7. There are 2 comic strips called Dennis the Menace, one from the UK, one from the US. They have nothing to do with each other and were developed entirely separately from each other, but they both premiered on the same day, March 12, 1951. Story 8. 99.6 or so of Canadians live further south than Leeds in England. Glasgow. Corrected because I misremembered the fact, and instead of looking up my notes, I winged it and got called out in the comments. Story 9. Flying from Anchorage, Alaska to London is about the same distance in time as from Miami, Florida to London. Curvature, girth matters. Story 10. Redheads may need more anesthesia. I had a surgery consult today and brought that up to the doctor. My hair is naturally red, and she told me that was ridiculous and not everything on the internet is true. Did a few Google searches and it seems to be a real thing. Peer-reviewed studies and all. Story 11. If everyone on Earth would play one round of rock, paper, scissors, and the winner goes on to the next round, the last man standing would only have to win 33 matches. Story 12. The first documented use of OMG to refer to oh my God was sent by Admiral Jackie Fisher to First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill in 1917 via telegram. Story 13. Michelin stars are given out by the Michelin Tire Company. It was a marketing ploy. designed to get people to drive further and to wear down their tires. Now it is seen as one of the highest endorsements in the cooking world. Story 14, Apple Corp., record label owned by the Beatles, sued Apple Computer for name infringement. They settled with Apple Computer paying a fee and agreeing never to get into the music business. The first sound file on a Mac was called So Sue Me, a playful jab taunting Apple Corp. So Sue Me. Story 15. There is a possibility the fastest man-made object in the universe is a manhole cover that was thrown into space using a nuke. The U.S. Army was testing nuclear bombs and tested one by drilling a deep hole, lowering the nuke into it, and sealing it with a manhole cover. Despite using a high-speed camera, the manhole cover post-detonation was only visible for 2 or 3 frames, which meant it was shot off extremely fast. In numbers, the manhole cover was even so fast it could have easily defied Earth's gravity and have left the planet. Of course, it's also very well possible that due to the speed, the friction potentially had evaporated the cover. But I personally love the idea that there is a manhole moving through space and potentially crashing into another planet in our solar system. Story 16. The U.S. presidency has a higher mortality rate than the U.S. Army. 8 out of 45 presidents have died in office, or 17.8. Obviously, this will vary by source, but according to the National Park Service, during the Civil War, the Union Army had a grand total of 2,641 men under arms over the course of the war. Of these, 680 died in battle or of disease. This excludes those wounded, captured, or missing. That's a 12.5 passing rate. The Park Service has a little infographic which puts the Union mortality rate at 15.5. But I'm unclear if that's for the whole Army, prisoners of war, or some other subset. In any case, that's still lower than 17.8. Story 17. Some of the oldest rocks in the world can be found at Mount Rushmore. The monument is carved in Precambrian granite that is approximately 2 billion years old. Story 18. The first documented high five didn't take place until 1977. I really struggle to believe that my parents basically lived through their entire childhoods never high-fiving a friend. You legitimately could have told me that the Pilgrims were high-fiving when they landed at Plymouth Rock, and I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Story 19. The largest air force in the world is the United States Air Force. The second largest air force is the United States Navy. Story 20. Wild but true, octopuses have 3 hearts. Honey can survive 3,000 years. Sharks predate trees, wombats poop cubes, and there's a jellyfish that can live forever. Nature really doesn't play by the rules. Story 21. Dolphins and migratory birds sleep with only 1/2 of their brain in sleep mode. The other half remains active and continues to guide them. Story 22. I've heard a shrimp's heart is in its head. It's a bizarre little fact that makes you stop and think about how wild animal biology can be. Story 23. Koalas have a hard time digesting the only food they actually eat because it's poisonous. But it's still the only thing they will eat. Also because they can digest it very well, the moms have a hard time producing milk, so the babies will suckle. The moms jerk and eat its shoot so it can get food, which also helps its body be able to somewhat digest the eucalyptus. Also, they have chlamydia. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Story 24. As a species, humans can outrun every other animal on Earth. Every animal. It's not that we're faster, it's that we have the longest endurance. They might get away from us, but we always catch up when the animal gets tired. Story 25. For the price you need to pay to have your hip replaced in the U.S., you could fly to Spain first class, have it replaced. Go running with the bulls. Break your hip aging, replace it a second time, fly back to the U.S. first class, and still have some left over. Story 26. During WW2, the U.S. Navy named their submarines after fish species. When they ran out of cool-sounding fish, they feared their crews wouldn't bond with their boats without good names. So they teamed up with the Smithsonian Institute, who took lesser-known species that only had scientific or whimsical names and created English names for them. Spelling and pronunciation both had to be reasonably simple. The average enlisted man and his girlfriend must be able to say the name comfortably. If his best girl couldn't spell it, he might not get her letters, source, answer. Among its many sinkings of merchantmen and warships, submarine USS Barb is also credited with the destruction of a train on Japanese soil. This act made the USS Barb the only naval vessel to ever sink a train, and the only Allied force to conduct a ground combat operation on mainland Japan during the war. The crew even added a train-shaped marker to the Barb's battle flag to commemorate the event. Story 27. A man named John Draper used a plastic whistle from a Cap'n Crunch cereal boxes to hack into the phone system and make free long-distance phone calls. The big man figured he'd use it while he could, so he did. AT&T, once they caught on, had a real fun time fixing the vulnerability before it became more widespread. Speaking of fun, the FBI played what was basically a giant game of hide-seek with anyone who tried using the whistle in an attempt to emulate Drappy J's cheat code. Once the FBI finally managed to formally introduce themselves to Mr. Phone Freak in person, they put him in jail for finding, using, and kickstarting one of the biggest and funniest phone system breaches ever. Story 28. Over his career, Larry Fitzgerald had more tackles than dropped passes, meaning there were more interceptions where he ran down and tackled the defender that intercepted the pass than passes thrown to him that he dropped. Story 29. By traveling at the speed of light, you would get to anywhere in the universe in an instant, as perceived by you. For everyone you left behind, it would take you lifetimes, so you could never reach another galaxy and return to share your tales with anyone you knew previously. Answer. The book Project Hail Mary explains this a little at the end of it. The trip for the guy in the ship was going to take him 3 years, but something like 12 years would have passed on Earth. The ship in the story was able to go almost a quarter the speed of light. Dial this up to your discussion. If you were able to obtain 90 speed of light and travel to a point 200 light years away, then swing around and come back home, about 400 years would have passed on Earth. For ease of math, we are going to ignore the deceleration of the ship. It just stops and does a U-turn. From your point of view, however, you have only spent 4 years on your ship. Bump that number up to 99, the speed of light. You would only spend about 4 days on the ship. 99, then you would only spend about 15 minutes on the ship. Regardless of your speed, however, someone on Earth would still have to wait 400 years for you to return. Time dilatation is both awesome and a pain in the neck. Story 30. Technically, I've been to N Korea. There's a BLDG. You go in on the DMZ tour that officially crosses the border. You cannot go more than like 5 to 10 feet in, or the Korean bodyguards in there will use force to stop you. Story 31. During the time of the Colosseum, gladiators would actually do sponsorships and advertisements for products. They even had billboards. They wanted to include it in the first Gladiator movie, but they thought that it would look unrealistic because it seems like such a contemporary concept. Story 32. Wombats have square poop. Cheetahs aren't big cats. They are very large, small cats. The fax machine was invented before the American Civil War. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't start World War III because of one guy. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, it is most likely that it is the first time in history the deck has been shuffled into that order. Story 33. Learn this in a design class. The world's best-selling car since 1979, not a Ford, or Toyota, it's the red and yellow Little Tikes Cozy Coupe. Story 34. Years ago, I had dinner with Edward Teller, who has been burned in effigy many times as the inventor of the atomic bomb. He told me the real story of its development, his scribbled calculations, and then he and Fermi asking his buddy Al Einstein to talk to the president about it. The entire reason for Los Alamos wasn't to build the bomb, but to get the best physicists together to figure out if it would destroy the world on first detonation. And by the way, Oppenheimer was chosen because he wasn't particularly talented. They needed a gopher to fly back and forth to give status updates. He made no real decisions, but it was beneficial misdirection if the world believed he was managing the project. And the A-tier physicists worked on whether it would destroy the world, and that was kept secret from the B-tier physicists who were acting as mechanics and making the bomb. Story 35. In the olden days of American, there lived a man by the name of Sir Timothy Dexter, aka the Informer of Deer. He was illiterate, but wanted nothing more than to be in politics. He gave everyone letters telling them why he should be in office. The letters were so bad they got foreign language experts to try and decipher it. Eventually, people got sick of him doing this and made a fake political position called the Informer of Deer. His job was to report all deer-related activity. Just one catch, though. There were no deer in this town, but it didn't matter to him. By the time he felt his job was done, he turned in his book, which was filled with illiterate ramblings and crudely drawn pictures of deer, and said, "Make sure the next Informer of Deer gets this," and he left to pursue his fortune. The job of Informer of Deer has never been filled again. Much more happens with him, so please look him up. I'll end it with this. He wrote a book near the end of his life called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, a short book that was also filled with illiterate ramblings, with no punctuation, but people bought it in such high quantities as a joke. A second edition was printed with a page that was nothing but various O and S and was accompanied by a strand of text that said, "Sprinkle these in where you wish." Story 36. If you extended a line due south from Orlando, FL, you will miss the entirety of continental South America to the west. Story 37. Gorilla Monsoon is the only person to wrestle Muhammad Ali and box Andre the Giant. Yes, that was stated correctly. Story 38. People used radioactive materials in all kinds of stuff in the last century and advertised it as beneficial for health. Story 39. That fresh-cut grass smell that you smell whenever people mow or plant substance whack their lawns is actually the grass and plants basically screaming for help and sending out a distress call, or rather a warning signal to all the other greenery nearby, telling them that there's danger. Story 40. There are over 920 known moons in the solar system. On a personal note, my favorite moon is Styx, which orbits Pluto. Story 41. You could expand a grapefruit to the size of planet Earth. The atoms in the grapefruit would be the size of blueberries. Grapefruit to Earth is the same size ratio as atom to blueberry. Story 42. Multiple POTUS, rich billionaires, entertainers, and politicians are pedophiles and in the Epstein files. Story 43. This one is fun for those who don't know French and a few people who didn't really process the Y when learning tens numbers. The normal 1, 2, 3 exist, but then you get to 10. Dicks, great. 10 times 60 are normal derivatives of the single digits, 3, 30, toy, trunte, etc. Then at 70, shoot takes off. 70, 60, 10, 60 dicks. 80? Oh, well, that's 4 20s, don't you know? Kutraving. 90? Oh, well, that's 10 more than 80, so that's 4 20s and a 10, right? Kutravang dicks. Story 44. Fudge the police caused a constitutional crisis in Australia and led to government workers to strike. Story 45. The bones of Waterloo battle are impossible to be found despite the huge number of deaths because they were used to bleach the sugar in the Belgian sweets factories and shops. Teeth instead were scavenged in the years to make teeth replacements. They were known as Waterloo teeth. Story 46. My dad's male body part was once in the Guinness Book of Records. That's also how he got banned from the library. Story 47. The number of unique card combinations in a deck is written as 52. Here's a cool copy pasta about it. Set a timer to count down 52 seconds. That's 8.06518.067 seconds. Stand on the equator and take a step forward every billion years. When you've circled the Earth once, take a drop of water from the Pacific Ocean and keep going. When the Pacific Ocean is empty, lay a sheet of paper down, refill the ocean, and carry on. When your stack of paper reaches the sun, take a look at the timer. The 3 leftmost digits won't have changed. 8.06 67 seconds left to go. You have to repeat the whole process 1,000 times to get 13 of the way through that time. 5.3 FM 267 seconds left to go. So to eliminate that time, you try something else. Shuffle a deck of cards, deal yourself 5 cards every billion years. Each time you get a royal flush, buy a lottery ticket. Each time that ticket wins the jackpot, throw a grain of sand in the Grand Canyon. When the Grand Canyon's full, take 1 oz of rock off Mount Everest. Empty the canyon and carry on. When Everest has been leveled, check the timer. There's barely any change. 5.3641267 seconds left. You'd have to repeat this process 256 times to have run out the timer. Answer. Reminds me of this. There's this emperor, and he asks the shepherd's boy how many seconds in eternity, and the shepherd's boy says, "There's this mountain of pure diamond. It takes an hour to climb it and an hour to go around it, and every 100 years a little bird comes and sharpens its beak on the diamond mountain. And when the entire mountain is chiseled away, the first second of eternity will have passed." Story 48. I think these are both common knowledge at this point, but I didn't come across either, so the T-Rex lived closer to modern day than they did to the Stegosaurus, and Cleopatra lived closer to the modern day than she did to the building of the pyramids. Story 49. Simeon II was crowned Tsar of Bulgaria at the age of 6, following his father's passing, possibly assassinated by the Germans. The monarchy was then abolished in 1946, and he went into exile. Decades later, he'd return to Bulgaria and be elected prime minister. Sounds like something you'd hear about a fictional European country in a comic book. Story 50. Most of the music we hear in the Star was movies is called jizz. Jizz is a genre of music within Star Wars, and those that play jizz are called jizz whalers. There is also a musical instrument called a jizz box. Story 51. American automakers had facilities in Nazi Germany building for their war machine. Once the war was over, some of them sued the U.S. Gov for bombing their factories. Story 52. Abraham Lincoln could have sent a fax to a samurai as they all coexisted. Sadly, there was a paper jam. Story 53. HU syndrome stands for autosomal dominant compelling helio-ophthalmic outburst syndrome. It is a condition where people experience involuntary, uncontrollable sneezing when exposed to bright light such as sunlight or artificial light sources. The name is derived from the onomatopoeic sound of a sneeze, a chew. The helio-ophthalmic part refers to the eyes, ophthalmic, being the trigger for the sneezing, while outburst describes the sudden and forceful nature of the sneeze. Story 54. There has never been a musical group, band, duo, singing team known as Hall & Oates. They have always gone by Daryl Hall, John Oates. Every album, every time. Story 55. There is a fungus that takes over ants' brains and essentially turns them into zombies. It's called Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. Story 56. Hey you, yes, you human astronomer 5269. It's not your turn to ask this question today. We have a team of volunteers who ask this question every fudge hour of every fudge day, and you're not scheduled until Thursday at 9 a.m. Story 57. There is an ethnic cleansing going on in the world right now, and the whole world is being gaslighted by the perpetrators. Story 58. Water buffalo can hold their breath for up to 5 minutes underwater and reach speeds of 30 meter fully submerged. Story 59. The actors who played the parents on Family Ties, Meredith Baxter and Michael Gross, were both born on June 21st, 1947. Story 60. There is a city in England called Scunthorpe. There are spam blockers that sometimes cause trouble when you search it. Other words trigger spam blockers. It is called the Scunthorpe problem. Story 61. Platypuses can detect electrical charges with their bills, which they use for hunting their prey. The males are also venomous. Story 62. Spiders learn your daily routine. Who the fudge figured that out? Anytime you see a spider in your house, it's because you've deviated from your daily routine and, according to the spider, you're not where you're supposed to be. I found this out just the other day. When I first moved into my place, it had been empty for a month or so, and there were spiders not everywhere, but noticeably around. Now I don't see them at all anymore. Story 63. Just learned this factoid. Most shooting stars you see are about the size of a raisin. That to me is unbelievable. Story 64. Until the 1930s, there was no plausibly correct scientific explanation for why the stars shone. It would have been entirely possible for a U.S. Army soldier to desert during the Civil War and run away to England to become a train driver on the London Underground. Story 65. Oslo, the capital of Norway, is 2 further south than Anchorage, Alaska. On the contrary, Sicily, the island in the far south of Italy, is only about 1 further south than Washington, D.C., from where it's tagged as a latitude. Meaning Oslo, Norway to the tagged latitude of Sicily, Italy is closer together than Anchorage, Alaska to Washington, D.C. when similarly tagged in latitude. Story 66. TLDR, a stack of 1 bills of the U.S. debt is 2.2x taller than the entire solar system stacked. A stack of 1,000,001 is 109 meters high, just taller than the Statue of Liberty. A stack of 1,000,001 is 109 kilometers high, just outside the rounded-off Kármán line, Earth's boundary into space. A stack of 1,000,000,001 is 109,000 kilometers high, 13 of the way to the moon. Taller than entire planets. Here we go. The U.S. is 37 trillion in debt. 37 stacks of 1,004,033 kilometer. All planets stacked together is 382,000 kilometer. The sun is 1,400,000 kilometer in diameter. 1,282,000 kilometer. 4,000, zo 33, 1,782, 2.26. Not width of the bills, not length of the bills, but the thickness of the bills. A stack, a towering stack of cosmic proportions. Story 67. Your eyeballs have an entirely different immune system from the rest of your body. If your body finds out about your eyes, they treat it like any other invasive organism and attack it. Story 68. Dolly Parton once came second in a Dolly Parton lookalike contest. Jesus and Augustus loved at the same time. The pyramids were older to Cleopatra than she is to us. Cambridge University is older than calculus. Sir Isaac Newton discovered the 3 laws of motion, the laws of gravity, the laws of optics and calculus before he turned 26. A Russian woman gave birth to a total of 69 children. British Queens Elizabeth II and Victoria reigned for a combined 134 years. more than half the existence of the USA and in the same time period. Story 69. Technically, there's no law against bank robbery. Edit. Okay, so I just Googled it and I was wrong. Do not rob a bank, for God's sake. Do not rob a bank. Story 70. Someone told me deer shed their antlers every year and grow them back. So those big 8-10 point bucks grew them in 1 year. I would have said 100 no way, but turns out that's true. Story 71. In the US, on average, it's not until you're 107 years old that your chances of living one more year drop below 50-50. Story 72. I heard that there are more trees on Earth than stars in the galaxy. Considering what we know about the size of the universe, I have trouble believing this fact. Story 73. PVC stands for polyvinyl chloride and is a commonly used plastic polymer. CPVC stands for chlorinated polyvinyl chloride and is also a commonly used plastic polymer. Chlorinated chloride. Story 74. The scientific name of llamas is Llama glama. Scientists have few opportunities to write their jokes in stone, but when they can, they do. Story 75. My grandfather's dad was offered a hefty piece of Coca-Cola for 50 bucks. He turned it down because he didn't think it would be worth it. Story 76. Most orange tabby cats are male, and most tortoiseshell tabby cats are female. To have a female orange tabby or male tortoiseshell tabby is considered rare. Story 77. Blockbuster had a chance to buy out Netflix, but Blockbuster said, nah. What are the chances everything will go digital? We will be still around renting, economic instability, and housing crash. Blockbuster reduced to a single functioning store, with active titter Netflix as a digital titan with its own film production and investments. Ironically, Kodiak had a similar story, creating the first patent for a digital mobile phone. But they shelved it, thinking, surely not everything will go digital, and they will still be processing physical photos. The first mobile phones come out with ever-increasing camera sizes and hard drive sizes and digital hard drives and clouds, with social media becoming the place to keep photos for the ages, without the need to buy plastic protection and frames. Story 78. If you looped a rope all the way around the Earth so it touches the ground the entire way, the length of rope required to raise it off the ground 1 foot all the way is only 6.28 feet. Same for a basketball. Story 79. The ancient Romans invented the high five, but back then it was a high V, at least according to Barney Stinson. Story 80. Your saliva can regenerate tooth decay from the inside out. Licking your tooth or chewing gum in that area can heal your tooth and get rid of your cavity within 2 weeks. Depending on how healthy you are, some people can get rid of cavities faster. But if your tooth cracks, it's already too late. Story 81. Trump's grandfather made his fortune intimacy trafficking girls and women in exchange for gold. To gold miners during the gold rush, he owned at least 6 brothels before settling in Queens, NY. Story 82. Wayne Gretzky is the fastest to score 1K career points. He is also the second fastest to score 1K career points. Story 83. Chuck Connors, the rifleman, was the first basketball player to shatter the backboard. It was with a shot, not even dunking it. Story 84. If there are 23 people in the room, there's a 50 chance that at least 2 of them have the same birthday. Story 85. Out of the 105 trillion known digits of pi, only 39 of them are needed to calculate the circumference of the universe to within the size of a hydrogen atom. Story 86. If you are on Little Diomede Island in the Pacific Ocean and you go 4 kilometers west, you automatically travel into the future. Story 87. If you're in downtown Detroit and want to drive or fly to Canada, you'll need to go south. But if you want to walk, you'll have to go north. Story 88. Dinosaurs never went extinct and we see them every day. They are just birds. Look at a cassowary and tell me that isn't a dinosaur. Story 89. Just a few cruise ships pollute on many atmospheric pollutants more than millions of cars do over the same time interval. Story 90. Fact. This exact question is posted at least 3 times a day in askreddit, and people like you are too lazy to check any of them before asking the question again. Story 91. You can fit all the planets of our solar system between the moon at its average distance from Earth, and Earth space is pretty big. Story 92. You don't swallow 7 spiders per year on average. You only swallow 0.1 spiders per year. But because of the law of averages, there's a man in Brazil who is swallowing thousands of spiders each day. Non-stop. That is his curse. Story 93. Okay, so not sure if this technically sounds fake, as it does sound like it would have been created, but the CIA created a weapon that is 100 untraceable and causes the person it is used on to have a heart attack. The dart used would dissolve in the person, leaving no trace, and the poison used wouldn't show up on any tests. The only proof it was used would be a pinprick in the victim the size of a small needle. Also could be wrong, but pretty sure they only found one of these guns, which was brought during the hearings they had about it in the 70s, and they found other designs for more weapons which the CIA claimed were never created, but they probably lied. So basically, there could be more of these weapons out there. Story 94. Nothing can move faster than the speed of light, yet we know that the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light. 68 of the universe is made up of dark energy, which we cannot see, isolate, test, or even detect in any way whatsoever. Story 95. A 34-time felon, child rapist, con man has carried out a coup seizing the U.S. presidency, and half of Congress is complicit in dismantling what's left of their democracy. Story 96. The 10th president of the United States, John Tyler, was born in 1790. His last living grandson passed away in May. Story 97. If you place each planet side by side, you could fit them between Earth and our moon. Space is truly huge, but most lack or doesn't desire to truly understand just how big is that. Story 98. Jacques Plante played for the Montreal Canadiens and won the Stanley Cup with them 5 years in a row, getting his name on the cup each time as you do. However, each time his name was spelled differently. Story 99. If you travel straight north from the southern entrance to the Panama Canal, the first U.S. state you will come to is South Carolina. Story 100. There's a place in Ohio where if you go directly north, south, east, or west, the first state you enter is West Virginia. Just south of Racine, OH, the Ohio River, the border between the states, does a little S-curve that causes the two states to kind of yin-yang around each other. The area around the Ledyard Falls Cemetery is totally surrounded by WV. Story 101. The moon is so far away from Earth that every other planet plus Pluto can fit in the space between. This is my go-to space fun fact. Kinda helps put into perspective how far away the moon is, and also just how big both the Earth and moon really are. Story 102. Sloths can hold their breath underwater longer than a dolphin can. They do it by slowing down their heart rate. Story 103. The smallest whole number with the letter B in it is 1 billion, and there's no element with the letter J in it. Story 104. Bananas are berries, but strawberries aren't. Sharks are older than trees. Octopuses have 3 hearts and blue blood. Story 105. The word brolic was a slang term invented from the name Broly. Yes, Broly from Dragon Ball Z. Broly invented the word brolic. Story 106. Radio Shack came about by the Tandy Aleher Company, wanting to branch out and went into electronics. And what was popular at the time, CB and ham radio, hence the name Radio Shack. Story 107. There are more ways to arrange a deck of cards than there are atoms on Earth. Every time you shuffle a deck, that is almost certainly the first time a deck has been in that exact order. Story 108. The U.S. is the 3rd biggest country by population. If its population quadrupled instantly, adding over 1 billion people, it would still be the 3rd biggest. Story 109. The U.S. was once threatening the UK and France with economic sanctions, and the USSR was promising to nuke them both at the same time. Story 110. More than 3x as many Europeans die of heat stroke than Americans do of gun violence every year. More than 3 times as many Europeans die from the heat at a latitude equivalent to Canada than Americans do to gun violence every year. Even more notable is that the cold eliminate 80x more people each year in Europe than American gun violence. Story 111. From the UK too, it's illegal to enter the House of Parliament wearing a suit of armor. A 1313 statute forbidding bearing of armor forbids members of Parliament from entering the House while wearing armor. This particular statute was put into place after a period of political turmoil. 3. It's legal to shoot a Scotsman under certain circumstances. According to the fact site, and only in York, the law states that it is legal to shoot a Scotsman with a crossbow upon seeing one, except for on Sundays. However, any Scotsman caught tipsy or with a weapon can still be shot on a Sunday, except with a bow and arrow. Similarly, in Chester, it is legal to shoot a Welsh person with a crossbow, as long as it is within the city walls and is done after midnight. 4. Using a phone to pay at a drive-thru while your car is still running, you could be fined for this. According to Oxbridge, the law is incredibly strict about the using phones behind the wheel of a car. Even if you're tapping a contactless pad with your phone at a drive-thru to pay for a meal. If your engine is running and your handbrake is unlocked, you're using your phone while managing a car, and this is against the law. The penalty for breaking this law is 206 points on your license. Maybe that Big Mac isn't worth it. 5. It's treason to misplace a postage stamp. Placing a postage stamp bearing the monarch's head upside down on an envelope is considered as active treason. Also, defacing or destroying anything bearing a likeness of the monarch is illegal. This means that burning paper money, bending coins, or tearing a postage stamp is against the law. 6. It's against the law to shake a carpet in London. You'll have to find another way to dust off that carpet, because simply shaking it is a criminal act. Under the Metropolitan Police Act of 1839, it's illegal to beat or shake a mat, carpet, or a rug in the streets of London. The only time you may beat them is before 8 a.m. 7. It's illegal to handle salmon in suspicious circumstances. This is a recent law, making it even crazier. But under the Salmon Act of 1986, it is an offense to receive or dispose of salmon under suspicious circumstances. Officers have a right to investigate if they reasonably believe that the salmon has been illegally fished. 8. Paying a lump sum for your facial hair. King Henry VIII imposed a beard tax that every man must pay to wear facial hair. He introduced a beard tax that lined his pockets and filled his dinner table. Moreover, the higher your social standing, the more you had to cough up. What if you cannot pay? Shave it away. Thus, beards became a symbol of status and money. The link? Answer. Under the Metropolitan Police Act of 1809, it's illegal to beat or shake a mat, carpet, or a rug in the streets of London. Is the Metropolitan Police Act of 1839 referencing the City of London, or is it about the greater city commonly known as London? I do love that you can shake your rugs, but only early in the morning, before any civilized people would be out and about. Otherwise, off to the goal with you. The contactless pay in the drive-thru is an hilarious piece of stickler of the law pedantry that I seriously hope no one's been fined for. Thank you for the link and the laugh. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Story 112. The inventor of the Galil, the Israeli service rifle inspired by the AK-47 Kalashnikov, was named Yisrael Balashnikov. He changed his name to Yisrael Galili in his 20s. Story 113. If you shuffle a standard deck of cards, it will be the first time in the history of the world that those 52 cards are in that exact order, and it will never happen again. In fact, if every person on Earth shuffled a deck of cards every second since the Big Bang until now, there still wouldn't exhaust all possible scenarios. Story 114. Termites outweigh humans in terms of overall biomass. Studies estimate that the collective weight of all termites on Earth surpasses the combined weight of all humans. Specifically, termites are estimated to weigh around 445 million tons, while humans weigh approximately 350 million tons. This means that for every person on Earth, there are roughly 1,000 pounds of termites. Story 115. The last Civil War widow passed away in 2020. In 1936, at the age of 17, she married a 93-year-old Civil War veteran. Story 116. Every day between 10:06 and 10:59 UTC, 3 different calendar dates are in use simultaneously on Earth. Story 117. Scientists estimate there are so many ants on Earth that, if you gathered them up, they'd outweigh humans about 2 to 1. Basically, for every person, you could imagine 2 full-sized ant people made out of ants. Story 118. Your epidermis is the largest organ in the human body. So feel your skin. That's biggest part of you. Feels weird knowing it and sounds fake, but it's true. Story 119. The first recorded use of the middle finger was by a member of the Boston Red Sox around the turn of the 20th century. Story 120. There is a species of bird named the plain chachalaca. It's the less flamboyant relative to the boom chachalaca. Story 121. Scientists have been able to vaccinate mice by flossing their teeth. Everyone go look this up, it's so cool. Story 122. Once a fertilized human egg starts dividing cells, it first forms into a gastrula, which essentially is the beginning of your colon, inner chamber that houses and suspends your internal organs, creating both ends of the holes that will become your mouth and jerk. So technically speaking, every human started off as a jerk. Some people merely choose to become more than that. Most don't. Story 123. If every person on Earth shuffled a new deck of cards every second for the age of the universe, the odds of 2 people ever producing the same exact order are practically 0. Story 124. Martin Luther King Jr. and Anne Frank were born in the same year. The Stegosaurus was as ancient to the Tyrannosaurus Rex as the T-Rex is to us right now. Stegosaurus temporal range 15.5145. Majority to T-Rex temporal range 72.766 RMA. Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire. Story 125. Canned food was invented at least as early as 1772. The first can opener was invented 83 years later, in 1885. Apparently, they used hammers and chisels for 8 decades before someone decided to find a better way. Story 126. The fact that ancient Egyptians probably had no real idea what the Sphinx's true origins were is mind-boggling. We think of ancient civilizations as having all these secrets mapped out, but some mysteries are just as perplexing millennia later, kind of like trying to solve a riddle buried in the sands of time. Story 127. Between December 1941 and the summer of 1942, the Gulf of Mexico was the most dangerous body of water in the world. The Americans, despite being at war with people they know have submarines and warnings from the British government, refused to institute blackouts. The main reason being that it would hurt tourism. Story 128. There is an inverse correlation between wealth and fertility. People that are wealthier tend to have less children, not more. Story 129. Famed and beloved kids entertainment star Blippi once did a Harlem Shake video where he's butt naked and sprays diarrhea on another guy. Story 130. The Waffle House is used as a gauge for hurricane severity. The Waffle House Index is an informal gauge used by FEMA and others to assess the severity of hurricane damage based on Waffle House restaurant operations. Story 131. The President of the United States is a lifelong conman crook inept pedochimo that gaslighted his way into the presidency by fear-mongering racists and bigots. Story 132. Salamanders are commonly associated with being summoned by fire in folklore. This is because they like to hide in decaying wood. And when people would burn the wood, the salamander wouldn't notice right away until it was fully engulfed in flames and then come out of the wood and crawl out from the coals. Story 133. Haagen-Dazs has no meaning in any language. It was meant to sound European. It was started by Ruben Mattis, a Polish immigrant to New York who sold fruit ice and ice cream from a horse-drawn cart. Story 134. Johannes Gutenberg, the man credited with creating arguably the most important invention in history, only had an operating printing press for a few years. He went bankrupt after his financier successfully sued him for not paying his loans. His then former financier came into possession of the printing press and any unfinished books. Story 135. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip, and on the day he was supposed to leave, the atomic bomb dropped. Tsutomu survived with minor injuries and returned to his home in Nagasaki, where he went to work 3 days later. As he was describing his experience to his supervisor, the second bomb was dropped, and he survived without any injuries. He ended up living into his 90s. Story 136. Over 70 years ago then, Naval Lieutenant James Jimmy Carter led a team that walked into a melting nuclear reactor core and shut it down safely. He got dosed with so much radioactivity, 10 Xerox, more than what we now consider safe. He pissed radioactive whiz for months. Yet he outlived not only his presidential successor, but his successor. He's the nation's oldest president ever and recently celebrated his 77th wedding anniversary, also a record for a president. He's currently in EOL hospice care and has been for almost 7 months now. The man is made of iron. Story 137. The time span between the use of copper swords and then steel swords is longer than the time span between the use of steel swords and the nuclear bomb. Story 138. This is the 147th time this question has been asked on this subreddit in the last 9 years. Twice 9 years ago, twice 7 years ago, 4 times 6 years ago, 5 times 5 years ago, 10 times 4 years ago, 13 times 3 years ago, 19 times 2 years ago, 39 times 1 year ago, once 11 months ago, once 10 months ago, once 9 months ago, 4 times 8 months ago, once 7 months ago, 6 times 6 months ago, 4 times 5 months ago, 4 times 4 months ago, 7 times 3 months ago, 10 times 2 months ago, 5 times 1 month ago, 26 days ago, 18 days ago, 13 days ago, 12 days ago, 8 days ago, and finally this one, 4 hours ago. Happy Fudge Cake Day. Answer: yeah, but you're forgetting every question in the same class. What is something that is actually the complete opposite? What sounds fake but is 100 true? What is something people think is good for them but it actually harmful? What is something women do that they think is attractive but is actually really annoying? What is an obvious lie that people still believe in? What sounds like a compliment but later you realize it's not. What is a food you grew up hating, but then eventually ended up liking? Chapunafari, what is really dangerous but everyone treats as safe? Story 139. The total weight of all the ants on Earth is estimated to be roughly equal to, or even greater than, the total weight of all the humans on Earth. Story 140. The moon is roughly 400x smaller than the sun, but also coincidentally about 400x closer to us than the sun. This makes them appear as though they are the same size, helpful for solar eclipses. This will change over time though, as the moon drifts away from us. We just happen to live in a time that they appear the same size. Answer, and its orbit is eccentric enough that sometimes it appears just a tiny bit smaller, so we get both total and annular solar eclipses. I wonder if Earth's societies generally ended up more religious than the universal average, because a coincidence like that, without understanding the mechanism behind it, sure would make the universe feel very intentional. Story 141. Brazil is so big that the northernmost point in Brazil is closer to Canada than it is to the southernmost point in Brazil. Story 142. Trees existed for a while before there was bacteria to break down trees, so most of the earth was just a pile of dead trees for a while. Story 143. If you shuffle a deck of cards, it's not only possible, but likely no deck has ever been in the same sequence in the history of humans. Story 144. You could be a carrier for any number of genetic diseases and not ever know it. And if you just happen to have a child with another carrier of the same disease, there is a 25% chance they will have it. Many of these diseases can be treated very well if caught on a newborn screening, but the majority of states don't have many genetic diseases on their newborn screening panel, so you won't have any idea until your child shows symptoms, and in most cases, by then it is too late. Source: Me, I'm a carrier for a rare terminal genetic disease called Krabbe disease. Had 2 perfectly healthy children, then when my 3rd child was 20 months old, he lost all of his abilities to walk, crawl, and even sit up unassisted in a matter of weeks. He is the 25% chance we didn't even know existed, since no one in either of our families ever had the disease. Now he is fighting for survival through a stem cell transplant to prolong his life. He has a page we use to spread awareness for anyone interested in seeing his journey. It's called Prayers for Arthur, Hope for a Cure. Story 145. If you cut some species of worms in half, they can regenerate into 2 separate, fully functioning worms. On other species, the front half will become a full worm, but the back half will grow another tail instead of a head, and will eventually starve to passing because it can't eat. Story 146. The Great Pyramids were older to Cleopatra than she is to us. Also, she was not Egyptian, but was the first Egyptian ruler of her dynasty to speak Egyptian. Story 147. There are more hydrogen atoms in a single molecule of water than there are stars in the entire solar system. Story 148. Your ribs, if removed, can actually grow back as long as the perichondrium membrane is intact. They're the only bones in mammals known to do so. Story 149. Octopuses have 9 brains, the central one, and 1 for each tentacle. They can also squeeze through anything their beak can get through. Story 150. All the planets in our solar system can fit between the Earth and the Moon when they are furthest apart. Story 151. Only 1 leader of the USSR was born in it, Gorbachev. Every other leader was born in the Russian Empire. Story 152. Mattresses get heavier over the years because of dead skin. Can you imagine all the dead skin in hotel beds? Story 153. More people die annually as a result of coal power than have died due to nuclear power in its entire history. Story 154. There are boat bridges where a boat can travel over a ravine between 2 bodies of water. These boat bridges only need to be strong enough to hold the water in them. The boats, no matter how heavy they are, never contribute to the weight that the bridge must hold. Story 155. Alaska is the center of the world, i.e., if you were going to set up an operation less than 8 hours away from the 3 biggest economies in the world, North America, Asia, and Europe, then Alaska is the perfect place to set up. Story 156. Atlanta, GA, is closer to Canada than it is to Miami. 955 kilometers to Windsor, Ontario. This versus 974 kilometers to Miami. Story 157. I have 2 facts about American baseball players. Stan Musial played for the St. Louis Cardinals from 1941 to 1963. He's considered one of the greatest outfielders of all time. In 326 career games, he had 1,815 hits in home games and 1,815 hits in away games. Ken Griffey Jr. played for the Seattle Mariners, Cincinnati Reds, and Chicago White Sox from 1989 to 2010. He made the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2016. He is only the 21st best baseball player born on November 21st in Donora, PA. Population of 4,568 as of 2020. The best? Stan Musial, born November 21st, 1920. Answer: ever heard of Rube Waddle? An absolutely dominant and all-time great pitcher, but would just randomly leave the field mid-game to chase fire trucks, pet dogs, or go fishing. Rescued multiple people from fires and floods. Just disappeared for months at a time to do random shoot, including wrestling alligators. In his prime, Waddell was the game's premier power pitcher with 302 strikeouts in 1,903, 115 more than runner-up Bill Donovan. According to baseball historian Lee Allen in the American League Story, Waddell began the 1,903 season sleeping in a firehouse at Camden, New Jersey, and ended at Tending Bar in a saloon in Wheeling, West Virginia. In between those events, he won 22 games for the Philadelphia Athletics, toured the nation in a melodrama called The Stain of Guilt, courted, married, and became separated from Maywin Skinner of Lynn, Massachusetts, saved a woman from drowning, accidentally shot a friend through the hand, and was bitten by a lion. Story 158, the Earth's atmosphere has a slight narcotic effect from the nitrogen, and you do better on cognitive tests using a helium-oxygen mix rather than fresh air. Story 159, that if you knock out a tooth and replace it in its socket, the tooth will grow roots again and survive. Story 160. There's a caterpillar parasite that takes control of the caterpillar's mind and makes it climb to the top of the forest canopy, where it then turns to liquid goop which rains down onto the forest, which then gets eaten by birds and animals which get infected with the parasite. Story 161. The iconic James Bond theme was based on a song by the same composer, Monty Norman, about a man with an unlucky sneeze. Story 162. Cleopatra lived closer to the release of the first iPhone than she did to the building of the pyramids of Giza. Story 163. Another BuzzFeed article in the making? I saw 2 yesterday that compiled answers to questions like these on this sub. Story 164. It would be cheaper to have Medicare for all than the current private healthcare scheme we have in the U.S. Like trillions of dollars cheaper, and would help with a lot of the social ills we have at the moment. Story 165. Dinosaurs lived so long that a T-Rex was closer in time to seeing a Justin Bieber concert than a Stegosaurus. Story 166. Northern Maine is the closest location in between Africa and the United States. Flights arrive all day and night there that departed from Africa. I didn't believe it until I watched it from my campsite years ago. Story 167. Professional wrestler Nick Gage died during a wrestling event called Tournament of Passing. He was pronounced dead for 7 minutes before being brought back to life. Yes, professional wrestling is predetermined, and the event, Tournament of Passing, is just for show. Nick Gage actually died during the event and lived up to what the event was named. Video of the incident that led to him dying. NSFW blood. Pintamermin Argentini. Story 168. Drinking a good amount of 100 pure water will eliminate you. It will leach vital minerals out of your body. Story 169. Barnard's star is moving so fast that we can track its movement, and it'll be our closest celestial neighbor in 10-0 years. Story 170. Most blue we see in nature isn't blue pigment, but is rather an illusion based on the shape of the surfaces. So like blue on birds' wings or blue on butterflies, it's usually just the way light reflects off of them. Story 171. Rabies virus has a 100 eliminate rate if left untreated. There are like 1 or 2 cases in all of human history of patients beating untreated rabies. Answer. There's a pretty cool update to rabies treatment. The theory, rabies actually doesn't eliminate you. It just overwhelms your brain so much that you end up dying from the brain chaos. Solution? Put the afflicted in a coma. Have life support external to the brain take over. It's just a virus one. The body actually can have a normal response too, if it has the time and energy. Story 172. The actual Pocahontas was actually a little girl when both her and John met. There was no romantic relationship. Story 173. Can't take credit. This is my favorite answer to this question I've ever seen. At a certain point in the cremation process, the meat is perfectly done. Story 174. Australia is wider than the moon. The moon sits at 3,400 kilometers, 113 miles, or however many eagles per freedom of speech. In diameter, while Australia's diameter from east to west is almost 40 kilometers, 485 miles, or however many costos wide by Henry Ford tall. Story 175. If you eat an entire polar bear liver, you'll die of a vitamin A overdose. In fact, there's enough to eliminate 52 adults. Story 176. There's a region of the Dominican Republic where sometimes when the girls reach puberty, they grow a male body part and testicles. They are known as huevadoche, which means male body part at 12. Story 177. If the planet Earth was a perfect sphere with a piece of rope laying on its surface around the equator, and you wanted to raise that rope to 1 meter above the surface all the way around the equator, you would only need an extra 628 meters of rope. Weirder still, it would be 6 to 28 meters regardless of the size of the circle or sphere. To increase the radius of a circular Milky Way galaxy by 1 meter, would only need an additional 628 meters applied to the circumference. Story 178. I know one more. There was a research published from North Carolina's Duke University that established that male monkeys were ready to forgo some food in exchange of a chance to view female monkey butts. Story 179. Collective human consciousness makes quantum random number generators all around the world behave in a less random, more coherent way during major world events. Story 180. It took us longer to go from bronze weapons to iron weapons than it did to go from iron weapons to nuclear weapons. Story 181. In 1983, the NHL's St. Louis Blues skipped the draft, refused to attend, and forfeited all their picks willingly. This was all BC the ownership group wanted to sell the team and get out of the hockey business. They had a buyer who would move them to Saskatoon, Canada, and the NHL rejected the sale. So as payback to the league, the Blues didn't improve their own roster. Story 182. There's a 108-acre forest in Utah that's really one large tree called Pando. It's assumed to have a huge interconnected root system underground. Story 183. The thagomizer is the end of the stegosaurus tail, specifically the arrangement of the 4 spikes. The term was coined by the artist who makes the Far Side comics. Story 184. 1 cubic inch of human produces more energy than 1 cubic inch of the sun. There are more trees on Earth than stars in our galaxy. Story 185. CFCs and leaded gasoline were invented by the same man, Thomas Migley Stur. He is regarded as the deadliest human to ever have lived. Story 186. We have destroyed more of the ocean floor in the last 5,075 years than we have destroyed forests since the birth of man. Scruffed. Story 187. Stephen Colbert was more famous and liked when he was a fake Republican than ever he was a real Democrat. Story 188. Paul Winchell invented the artificial human heart, which he donated the plans for to the University of Utah and helped revolutionize prosthetic pumps. He was also a well-known ventriloquist and the voice of male body part dystrophy in Wacky Races. Story 189. City planners decided to plant solely male trees to avoid having to deal with female fruiting trees, and it's largely why everyone's allergies are so out of control now. Story 190. Star Trek is at least partially responsible for one of the most monumental events in United States political history. In 2004, Jack Ryan was running for Senate as a Republican. He was running for a seat where the incumbent was an R who was retiring, so it should have been a very winnable seat for him. But he was also having marriage issues with his wife, Jerry Ryan. She was an actress that just got hired for a role as a Borg named 7 of 9 in a new Star Trek series. Jack was not a fan of her now busy schedule in Hollywood while he campaigned for the Senate. That stain on their marriage eventually led to them going to divorce court. Despite Jack asking for the details to be sealed, the California court released the details of their case, which included Mr. Ryan routinely pressuring Mrs. Ryan to do intimacy acts in public. The scandal caused Jack Ryan to drop out of the race close to the general election. The Republicans put up Alan Keyes as their nominee, but there wasn't enough time left to really promote him before the election. The Senate seat ended up going to his Democratic opponent in a landslide, a relatively unknown community organizer from Chicago named Barack Obama. Story 191. Companies including Adidas, Puma, IBM, Volkswagen, and Bayer were all originally founded by members of Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. Story 192. The Brazilian Constitution protects a specific traditional school in Rio de Janeiro, keeping it in the federal orbit. Constitutions around the world are usually for fundamental norms only, but the Brazilian one has a lot of random things like that. Story 193. The famed Fushimi Inari Taisha in Kyoto, Japan. That one with lots of torii shrine gates that tourists love for photos, was established with the aid of the Hada clan, descendants of the royal house of the first Chinese dynasty, Qin dynasty. Also because of their use of the Kagomimon, which looks identical to the Star of David, as their heraldry, some early European explorers created a theory that the Japanese were one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Story 194. 90 of all of Germany's casualties of their combined forces in WW2 were suffered on the Eastern Front. Story 195. The Krakatoa volcanic eruption hit 170B from 100 miles away. 330B would have destroyed the planet. 1100B would destroy the universe. Story 196. There's an odd rainbow parasite which targets snails for lodging inward them, and when it's already consumed their organs, the snails look like colorful funk pop stage lights, meanwhile are using their bodies as shell for moving around naturally. Story 197. That girls are born with all the egg cells they will have in their life. So if you're pregnant, you already carry the egg cells that will be your grandkids. Story 198. You have the bite force power to bite off your own fingers as easy as carrots, but your brain won't let you do it. Story 199. Taco Bell is one of the healthiest American chain fast food restaurants, and by a significant margin over a lot of other chains. Story 200. When basketball was first invented, at every game, they would have a man who would go up a ladder to retrieve the ball after every basket. It took them around 20 years to figure out maybe it would be a good idea to cut the bottom of the basket out to make retrieving the ball a lot easier. 20 years. Story 201. Bristol TN is 495 miles from Paley Island, Canada. Bristol TN is 505 miles from Interstate BBQ in Memphis, TN. Story 202. When someone smokes the last of their cigarette, the temperatures can reach up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Story 203. The U.S. dumped its chemical weapons stockpile off the shore of New Jersey. Right now, there are corroding steel barrels full of the most horrible things imaginable sitting on the bottom of the Atlantic. Look up VX. Story 204. The sun is closer to the Earth, perihelion, at around 0.98 AU when it's winter in the Northern Hemisphere, than when it is summer, aphelion, at around 1.1 AU. Story 205. For real, your forearm is the same length as your foot. Still blows my mind when I put my foot against my forearm. How is this possible? Story 206. There are more possible iterations of a game of chess than there are atoms in the observable universe. Story 207. Between two battles in WW2, Stalingrad and Moscow, the Russians lost more troops than America has lost since the Revolutionary War. Story 208. Holy shoot, thank you. I was trying to find the number myself. I feel like I see this stupid question posted every 15 minutes. Story 209. Not a fact, but something that happened to me. I had a friend over named Hansel, when this girl I hadn't seen in ages showed up out of nowhere. Her name was Gretel. Story 210. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 4. Story 211. There are countless dinosaur species that we'll never know about because they lived in regions where they could not possibly get fossilized. Story 212. There is more molecules in one breath of air than there are breaths of air in our atmosphere. You are breathing the same air that Alexander the Great did. Story 213. The time span between Cleopatra and the building of Cheops pyramids is longer than the time span between Cleopatra and the first iPhone. Story 214. One sperm has 37.5 MB of DNA information in it. That means a normal ejaculation represents a data transfer of 1,587 B in about 3 seconds. Story 215. I once crapped my pants while on a motorcycle, speed up to 105, leaned forward and pointed my legs back. Azair cleaned it all right out. Sorry to the minivan behind me, but nature called and I had to answer. Ha! Sincerest condolences, Rick. Story 216. It was originally planned that Pokemon would have over 60 different versions, but it was ultimately narrowed down to 2. Story 217. A photon could leave a star on the other side of the universe and travel billions of light years across the vastness of space just to end its journey by hitting some fat guy's jerk on a private pictures beach. Story 218. Only about 10 of the total number of cells that make you up is human cells. The other 90 is bacteria, normal innate flora. Story 219. Artificial sweeteners and diet drinks are not terribly toxic for you. Can provide studies if anyone wants evidence. Story 220. You can fit every other planet plus Pluto in the solar system between Earth and the Moon with room to spare. Story 221. There is a controlled disclosure of the UFO presence on this planet in the 2023 Defense Authorization Bill. It is detailed and makes for very wild reading. Section 4 of this post goes into it. Story 222. You can get respirator brain if you've been hooked up to a respirator and in a coma for a prolonged amount of time. Basically, the stasis of blood flow due to systemic circulatory failure causes edema and cell passing in the brain, and your brain undergoes diffuse liquefactive necrosis. So, in the most basic of terms, your brain liquefies. This can occur due to infarction, think stroke, trauma, and abscesses as well. In those cases, that area of injury will undergo liquefactive necrosis, and you're left with a chunk of brain missing. Story 223. That Bob Mortimer gave Damon Hill a Scotch egg, pocket meat, shortly before racing in a Formula One Grand Prix. Story 224. Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump committed treason by colluding with foreign adversaries to get elected. Story 225. Despite its name, the planet Mercury isn't known to contain any trace of the element on its surface. Story 226. I'm directly responsible for the downfall of Al-Qaeda. I was in Iraq in 2007 and found a computer, cell phone, and a stack of CDs while clearing houses in an area. The intelligence officer later became my platoon leader, and I found out through him that the information that I found had supply route, contacts, everything you would need to shut them down. He would watch news reports, and apparently people identified in these findings kept accidentally or mysteriously dying. Story 227. Bill Clinton lost his presidential nuclear launch codes for months while in office. America was vulnerable to a nuclear attack for months, and nobody knew. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.